Hello, everyone, and welcome to Deviance and Crime, otherwise known as Social Control, Deviance, and Crime. Before you watch this, make sure that you have done the drug policy exercise. That's the in class activity for this week. Okay, so make sure you do that first. There are some answers to some questions you might have about that exercise um, later on in here. So let's first talk about social control. Social control is those mechanisms that create normative compliance in individuals. Okay, so yeah, how we conform to social norms. That's what social control is. Okay, think about things like the Solomon Asch experiments. Think about things like groupthink. Think about things like the bystander effect. Think about things like the Stanley Milgram experiments on obedience. Think about the Stanford prison experiment and the Lucifer effect. Okay, um, there's something about humans is that we want to be well liked, and we want to feel like that we are a part of a group. Okay, and so when we feel like we're a part of a group, when we're have social integration, we are regulated by the group. So that's a method of social control. Okay, so I think I've said before, you're all a bunch of conformists. That we are, that we all want, conform to the norms of the group or the norms of the wider society in order to fit in. Okay. Um, some exceptions there, of course, because you're also all a bunch of deviants. Okay. Social deviance is any transgression of socially established norms. Okay. So it's norm violation. That's all it is. It's it can be formal deviance, which violates the official rules or laws or the mores, or informal deviance, violation of the folkways of customary norms. Okay, it's everybody is deviant. Okay, everybody is deviant. So, um, you know, in order to obey one set of norms, you often have to violate another set. Okay, well, because I asked my students over at Foothill College, those of you familiar with where Foothill is, this will sound familiar. Say, well, how fast are you supposed to go on 280? The speed limit's 65, but what happens if you go 65 on 280? Yeah, there'll be people who are like thinking you're going too slow. So those, and then how fast are you supposed to go? Those kinds of things. It's, you have to violate one social set of norms without, in order to conform to another. Maybe some of you have been in this position before. Okay, so there's all sorts of deviance. I'm going to talk a lot about formal deviance today. I'm going to talk a lot about crime because there's a sociologists have been very interested in crime. As a matter of fact, there are people who have been interested in crime for a long time, even pre-sociological thinkers. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with deterrence and rational choice theory. Okay, deterrence theory is based on rational choice theory. Deterrence theory is what our criminal justice system is based on. And it states that if punishment is severe, certain, and swift, crime will be deterred. Okay? Yes, if punishment is severe, certain, and swift, crime will be deterred. And there are two different kinds of deterrence. Special deterrence deters the individual. Okay? So if somebody robs a liquor store and gets sent to prison, and then they get released and told don't do it again. Okay, special deterrence deters the individual. General deterrence deters the general population. Okay, so when somebody robs a liquor store and they're sent to prison, the message is sent to the general population: same thing's going to happen to you. Okay, so the question comes up to it's okay. let me go through this a little bit more. It's based upon rational choice theory. Rational choice theory says that it's a way of viewing our decisions as calculated to maximize our benefits and minimize our costs. So, rational choice theorists, it's basically an economic model. Okay, they say, well, we are going through life and we're weighing out the costs and benefits of our decisions. So, and we make the choices that will maximize our benefits and minimize our costs. So, in terms of crime, it is thought that if punishment is severe, certain, and swift, crime is deterred because the cost of doing the crime is going to outweigh the benefits you might get out of it. So let us follow this kind of line of thinking here. So there's the risk of punishment versus the reward of crime. Does deterrence work? Well, a lot of people say no, it does not because of the recidivism rates we have. Okay. Because like there's a lot of people who do crimes, they go to prison, they get out, and they do crimes again. We'll get to that in a bit. Yet, I think most people are deterred from doing a crime. Okay, you might be able to think about a crime that you might do if you could get away with it. If you knew you could get away with it, would you do it? Think a little bit about this, and you can you can say, okay, yeah, you can come up with something. Why aren't you doing it? You are deterred. Okay. So it's about special deterrence. What deters on the individual level. Okay. So we're deterred as a general population because we have these examples of people going to prison. Okay. So when somebody commits a crime, they might think it's a perfectly rational thing to do. Let's say somebody pickpockets on the train. Like down over here, we have Caltrain. They pickpocket 100 times and they get caught on the 101st and they get probation. Was it rational to do that? Some would say yes, because they got the rewards of the crime. See, punishment is not always certain. Okay. And so it might be a perfectly rational thing to do. What's more likely to deter people is not so much the risk of punishment, the fact that they might be punished, because that's just too vague. But what might deter people is social disapproval from significant others. They wouldn't commit a crime because their parents wouldn't approve, or their partners wouldn't approve, so they don't do it. Okay, so let's see. So anyway, so that experiential effect is very important too. Like people keep doing crimes because they keep getting away with it. That's somebody came up by Raymond Pasternoster came up with that. Okay, so informal sanctions do have a stronger deterrent check than formal sanctions. Okay, let's see. That's according to Franklin Zimring and Gordon Hawkins. Okay, so that's deterrence theory, and it's kind of the problem. One of the problems with our criminal justice system is that, it's rational choice theory has a lot of problems because it doesn't take into account the subjective point of view of the actor. Okay, so anyway, that's part of the problem. It's also tautological. Ask me about that if you're interested. Okay, so you read about Durkheim and the functions of crime. This article is a little hard to understand, but I'll go through it a little bit. First, a lot of people, when they write about Durkheim and the function of crimes, they stay on that whole thing about crime is inevitable. And it is. Okay. Durkheim says that crime contributes to the stability of society in three ways. One, it creates moral boundaries. it defines acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Okay. Second, it creates social solidarity. It reinforces the collective consciousness. Okay. It bonds people together. Okay. And then social change. It could, violations of law could indicate where social change is needed. Durkheim thought we needed crime. The reason why crime is inevitable is not so much because there's always going to be a bad actor, but um, this, but the government or society is always going to create bad actors because they're going to always create this idea of bad, and there has to be some people doing it. Okay, for it to be defined as such. Basically, Durkheim is saying that if everybody obeyed all the laws, society would have to create more crime by creating more laws. Okay, so in order to have that kind of those moral boundaries and the social solidarity. Okay, another theory from a functionalist, this comes from Robert K. Merton, is anomie strain theory. In your book, it's called, I think it's just called strain theory. Okay. So remember, anomie means normlessness. Okay. It's a word that Durkheim uses. And so Merton, um, states that an well-integrated society has to do two things. They have to balance the relationship between socially approved of goals or the culture and legitimate means to attain those goals. The social structure or the culture is the social goals, and the legitimate means to achieve them is about the social structure. So in the United States, there's one of the big, like, socially approved of goals is economic success. That is something we're supposed to be pursuing. How are we supposed to attain that? Well, education is one, or working your way up through, through a company or something like that. Getting an entry level job, then working your way up, and things like that. Doing things, working hard in that position, and getting promoted and things. That's socially approved of, okay, in obtaining economic success. But what if the the avenues to attain those goals are blocked? What if somebody doesn't have access to school? What if somebody doesn't? What if jobs are not available in an economic crisis? What about that? Okay, well, so when one embraces the goal, but legitimate means to attain the goal are blocked, anomie strain is the result. A person is going to feel strained by, like, trying and trying and trying and not succeeding. Okay, you've strained yourself before, I guess. And anomie, the feeling of, like, you don't know what to do, the feeling of normlessness. This is not working. What am I supposed to do now? Okay, so how do people adapt to that? There's 5 modes of adaptation, which are, first is conformity. Most people embrace the goals and embrace the legitimate means to attain the goals. So they embrace the goals and the means. And in this situation, this is what most people will do. Most people will keep trying, okay? And they will not slip into forms of deviance. They will keep trying, okay? But there are some people who will do something different, innovation. They embrace the socially approved of goal of economic success, but come up with illegitimate means to attain those goals, like drug dealing. I think is my favorite example, because drug dealers are entrepreneurs. They're as American as apple pie. That's kind of like, embracing the culture, the cultural goal of economic success. They just come up with different ways to do it. Okay, so that's innovation. Rebellion is next. Is why you neither, you reject both the goals and the means to get there, and you organize a revolution or something like that. Okay, that's when you reject the system altogether and replace it with something else. Okay, retreatism is when you neither re- accept nor reject the goals or the means. You just give up. Okay, you just retreat into your hovel and drink or shoot heroin or whatever, something like that. But you just retreat from society. Okay. And then finally, ritualism. Somebody who's engaging in ritualism has given up the struggle for economic success, but they concentrate on retaining what little they have gained by rigidly and zealously adhering to the social norms. Okay, so these are people in bureaucracies. Often they're in bureaucracies. They're in the quote dead end jobs, no hope of advancement, no hope of like doing anything more, and so they rigidly adhere to the policies, the norms, and things like that. So as to not lose anything that has been not lose anything that has been gained already, but they've given up the whole idea that they're going to get ahead. Okay, so this is a little chart you can look at um, with the goals and the means and all of that. So anyway, next is one of I think it's my second favorite theory. Okay, second favorite theory is institutional enemy theory by Stephen Messner and Richard Rosenfeld. Okay. Um, this is in their book called Crime and the American Dream. Okay. Um, They say that crime in the United States is the result of several key cultural values, including achievement, okay, economic success, individualism. You can achieve economic success on your own. Universalism, that all Americans are able to pursue this. And money fetishism, okay. This is the idea that um, how to put this? A fetish is not something you might be thinking. Okay, anthropologically, a fetish has, is something that's an object that is thought to have magical powers. Okay, or some kind of like, may contain God or magic and things like that. That there's something magical about an object, that goes beyond the physical world. For example, I sometimes have had the exercise about this with the social construction of reality of handing a student $1 to cut up in class, and the whole class just is shocked that I had them do that. So, money fetishism. Okay, so these are kinds of like so what that leads to is the love of money for just the love of money. Not money's not a tool, it's just, it contains such magical power. So these cultural values give more power to economic institutions, okay, over others. So other institutions such as religion and education, family, and things like that, these institutions that are there to teach us conformity to social norms are lose their power. And in this case, you have economic dominance. Okay, economic goals are assigned a high priority in comparison with non-economic goals. Okay, so what are the socially approved of goals? Well, it's great if you are, if you want to be a philanthropist or, somebody who is, you know, does priestly things and, but doesn't make a lot of money. But for a lot of people, it's like the biggest goal is some kind of economic success, okay, in comparison with non-economic goals. So, um, so the claims of economic goals are typically honored at the expense of non-economic goals when conflicts occur. Okay, so it goes like this. Oh, just to show you what how much economic goals are such a high priority and how they trump non-economic goals is that I have students who want to be sociology majors, but they tell me that their parents tell them that they can't do anything with a sociology degree, which is not true, by the way, and that they want them to major in something like business or computer science or medicine or something like that, something that pays a lot better. But the student is going to be happier, um, majoring in sociology. So the whole thing about like whether study something you're interested in or study something that you are or study something that makes money. A lot of times parents will say, go for the money, that kind of thing. Go for the money, okay? Social standing is more dependent on the performance of economic roles rather than non-economic roles. Okay, so the most prestigious people in the South Bay, I would argue, are the big tech leaders. Okay, those because they succeeded in tech. Okay, and so then what happens is that the utilitarian logic and calculating logic of the marketplace penetrates other institutional realms. And so other institutions start acting like economic institutions. Okay. Now, to a certain degree, they are economic institutions, family, education, religion, etc. But there's the more calculating and utilitarian logic starts penetrating them more and more. Okay. So how does all of this lead to crime? Non-economic institutions that are responsible for cultivating respect for social norms lose their power and respect. So then you have economic dominance. Okay, and so why do I like this theory so much? Because of it's one of the best theories for to explain white collar crime. When we think about crime, we usually think about street crime. Okay, murder, rape, robbery, burglary, theft, auto theft, etc. You know, 8 different FBI index crimes, they're called. Yet, white collar crime kills more people and costs more money by a lot than compared to street crime. So people really do have more to fear from white collar crime than street crime. Okay. And it's something that other theories of crime do not explain as well as this one. So that's institutional enemy theory. On to the next one. Techniques of neutralization. Gresham, Sykes, and David Matza. Years ago, it was thought that, about juvenile delinquents in particular, um, that juvenile delinquents were different than the rest of us. That criminals, like juvenile delinquents, had like the same social values as the rest of us. Okay. Gresham, Sykes, and David Matza rejected this idea. They say that juvenile delinquents maintain their moral code, but when they drift from it, when they do something that goes against it, they have to employ excuses and rationalizations for their criminal behavior. And these are already, they're extensions of what's already found in the culture. So a youth will do something, commit a crime, and then get caught, and then feel guilty about it, but then they'll like try to justify what they did. Okay. And they'll try to and they have to come up with some kind of justification that's believable. That's why it's an extension of what's already found in the culture. So these are kind of the techniques of neutralization that resonate with some people. Okay. So There are 8 of them. The first 5 are the most studied. Okay, so the first one, denial of responsibility. It was something beyond their control, an accident, somebody made them do it, I was just following orders, etc. I am not responsible. I am not responsible for what I did. That's yeah. Um, that's an excuse, yeah. Whereas when you're like trying to get out of responsibility, denial of injury. It was not wrong because no one got hurt. Um, let's say somebody drove drunk and they made it home fine. They didn't hurt anybody. They didn't kill anybody. They got home fine. Maybe a little hungover, but they got home fine. Therefore, not wrong because no one got hurt. The actions didn't cause an injury, so it's not wrong. Okay? So, denial of an injury. Denial of a victim. This is different than a victimless crime. Victimless crime. This is the person deserved whatever action was done to them. They had it coming. Okay, you may know that song from Chicago. He had it coming. So it's it's not like it's not wrong because the person deserved it. Okay, condemnation of the condemners, and I admit that I was really good at this when I was a kid. Okay, you're all a bunch of hypocrites. You were just as bad in your day. Those kinds of things. Condemnation of the condemners. Okay. The fifth one is appeal to higher loyalties. Had to help my friend. Following God's law. Okay. The law is unjust. A lot of nonviolent civil disobedience, I believe, is appeal to higher loyalties. Okay. Disbursement of blame. This is something in a group. You're passing the blame around to others in a group to minimize your own responsibility. So if a group of people do something together, and the whole group is caught, they'll be pointing fingers at each other rather than themselves. Okay. Dehumanization of the victim, where the victim is reduced to a lower status, a lower kind of like on the prestige scale. This is a lot of sex crimes, a lot of genocide. Think about those kinds of things. Okay, where they're not, where the victim is not thought of as a real human being. Okay. Might think about some of that from the Phillips and Bardo talk too. And misrepresentation of the consequences. That's minimizing the consequences and only focusing on the rewards, like shoplifting. I often ask my students, if they knew that they could get away with it, would they steal $1 million? Even if, and they have no chance of getting caught, and they don't know where the money is coming from. And several students say, yes, they would. That would be misrepresentation of the consequences. Because then what if it turns out that the money is from Make-A-Wish Foundation? You just denied some dying children their final wish. So anyway, that's techniques of neutralization. I think this next one is my second favorite theory. It's critical criminology. Okay, critical criminology. This is the idea that capitalism produces social inequality, which in turn produces crime, especially street crime. Street crime is an expression of need that is denied within a capitalist system. Okay, so people turn to street crime because they are, say, they are living in poverty. Okay, so and that poverty was produced through capitalism. Critical criminologists also point out that those in power produce laws to protect their privileged position. Okay, Karl Marx said that the ideas of the ruling class are the ruling ideas. So whoever has the economic power has the ideological and the political power to produce laws. Okay, so um, that there are therefore harmful acts committed by the elites are often not outlawed at all or not punished. Okay, um, and this gets into yeah. Here's an example: pollution by industry. Some of it's legal, some of it is not. It kills thousands of people a year. One criminology textbook I know of says it kills about 35,000 people a year. That's by Stephen E. Barkin. And yet, it still goes, and when pollution happens, oftentimes it's not punished, or it's just not not outlawed at all. But the elites commit harmful acts, um, and and there's without a consequence. When poor people commit harmful acts, it's usually not on such a large scale, okay, and they are severely punished, okay. The criminal justice system is biased against the poor, okay. And this gets into, some of you read, if we're doing this for summer, those of you watching this summer of 2019, read Jeffrey Ryman's The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. Um, when he talks about Pyrrhic defeat theory, okay, Pyrrhic defeat theory. So to explain this, a Pyrrhic victory is a military term in which you won the battle, but you took on so many losses that it amounts to a defeat. Okay, so that's a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic defeat states that the criminal justice system fails at addressing the crime problem, at reducing crime, but it goes to benefit the elite so much that it amounts to a success. Uh, Ryman says nothing succeeds like failure. So there's two ways in which the criminal justice system is particularly biased against the poor. One has to do with bail. Okay, if the poor cannot make bail, they are more likely to get convicted. Okay, another is the attorneys. Okay, if the poor have to rely upon um, I just blanked on it. It's not the district attorney. It's the free one. I just blanked on that name. I don't believe I did that. It'll come to me at 3 in the morning. I'll give you a call. But you know who I'm talking about. The poor have to rely upon the one appointed by the state. Okay, the public defender. Thank you. Okay, the public defender. So if the public defender's office is underfunded, okay, and they basically don't have the resources to really put up a fight, okay. So if you are poor for the same crime, you are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and sent to prison than if you're rich for the same crime. Okay. And there are many statistics that could back that up if you're interested. Okay, so critical criminologists look at the solution to crime as to have a more equitable society and an emphasis on human rights, not more prisons. Okay, they are especially opposed to the idea of the prison industrial complex and the idea of for-profit prisons. If you have for-profit prisons, you are motivated to have more prisoners. Okay, mass incarceration becomes the norm. Okay, so that's, in a nutshell, is critical criminology. Next, we're going to go on to learning theory. There are some people, this is called differential association theory, and it's about criminal behavior being learned. Okay, so many years ago, it was believed that criminals had a certain kind of physical disposition that led to them being crime. There are some people who came up like criminals had certain body types, it was thought. Okay. Edwin Sutherland, I think in the 1930s, said no. He had 9 points here, and I'm kind of synthesizing them into 4. Okay. First of all, he says that no, criminal behavior is learned. Criminal behavior is learned in interaction with other persons in the process of communication within intimate personal groups. And by the way, I should say that I'm basically using his words. Okay. Just synthesizing his main points. Okay. When criminal behavior is learned, the learning includes the techniques of committing the crime and the specific direction of motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes. In other words, we are taught not only how to commit the crime, but why we should commit the crime, how we should feel about committing the crime, what is our what we should think about the crime, what justifies our committing the crime, things like that. And that's the so we learned both things. How and the direction of motives, rationalizations, and drives and attitudes. So the specific direction of motives and drives is learned from definitions of the legal code as favorable or unfavorable. Let's see. That is hard to wrap one's brain around, this last point. But Stephen E. Barkin, a criminologist, says, in his words, gaining knowledge of criminal behavior also involves learning about whether to define laws as worthy of obedience or deserving of violation. Okay, in that sense. So Barkin said it much better. Learning whether a law should be obeyed or not. So this next one is the kicker. This next one is the one that's the most important. It is the principle of differential association. If you learn nothing else about differential association theory, learn this. Okay? Ta-da! A person becomes delinquent because of an excess of definitions favorable to violation of the law over definitions unfavorable to violation of the law. Okay? So, the person has learned that these definitions are the motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes. That kind of thing. Okay? So, the person has learned, how to commit a crime, why they should, and what laws are worthy of violation, what laws aren't. And so they have an excess of definitions, motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes, favorable to violation over definitions unfavorable to violation. Okay? I do an exercise in class sometimes about like shooting heroin. Why would someone do it? Why would somebody not do it? And all of the reasons why they shouldn't do it, I take away, except for the fact it's illegal. But then they have all other reasons to do it. So it's almost like a rational choice thing. Okay, so that's that. So, excuse me. Differential associations may vary in frequency, duration, priority, and intensity. Okay, so our motives, our drives, our rationalizations, and attitudes, they can change. They can also be, they can also take on more strength in some times and less strength in other times. Okay, they can, for some people, just one or two things is going to be enough to keep them not violating the law. For example, it being illegal. Many people want to think of themselves as law-abiding citizens, and that might be enough. For most of us, though, I think that let's put it this way. if I thought about it long enough, if we had a conversation and the conversation was long enough, chances are, it's not doesn't apply to all of you, but to many of you, I can figure out something, a crime that you have done, something that could get you jail or prison time. Okay, if we if we if I had a long enough conversation with you, um, to start thinking this through, you might think about all that downloading movies and videos and music that you may or may not have done. Okay, those kinds of things. So anyway, or taxes, things like that. So um, that's differential association theory. Okay, so on to the control theories. The control theories ask the question, why do we conform? They don't ask the question, why do we violate the law? They ask the question, why do we conform? Deviance is taken for granted, and conformity must be explained. The answer is that we conform because social control prevents us from deviant behavior. Okay? We need no special motivation to break the law. That is already, we are already disposed to doing that. We are already disposed to break the law. Okay, kind of a psychological theory. It's kind of like, this is like in our ids, okay, in our, like, that the id, that's the part of the personality that Freud said. The id has like desires, it knows what it wants and things like that, and sees a car and just steals it. The ego, though, takes, keeps the id intact, says that it's wrong to steal a car, don't do it. Okay, so, therefore, crime is the result of social controls breaking down. Okay, so control has broken down. So with control breaking down, there goes crime. The result is crime. The classic control theory is by Ivan Nye, and he talked about three kinds of controls. There's direct external control. And that's like punishment is imposed for a violation, okay, for misconduct, okay? So that's like jail, prison, things like that, okay? Indirect control is which, like, someone refrains from criminal behavior because of disapproval from significant others, like parents and things like that. I was like talking about youth a lot of times, okay? It's relationship with parents. And third, there's internal control, in which one's conscience or sense of guilt prevents them from engaging in delinquent acts. So there's three reasons not to rob a liquor store. One, you might be put in prison. Two, your parents wouldn't approve. Three, you just feel really terrible if you did. Okay? Any of those will do. Okay? Any one of them will do. But because, if all three of them break down, then crime is much more likely. Okay? So, control theory that trumped all other control theories, and is the most tested in criminology, is social bonding theory by Travis Hershey. Okay. Travis Hershey's general proposition is delinquent acts result when an individual's bond to society is weak or broken. Okay. There are four elements to this theory, and all of them are interconnected. First, there is attachment to others. That's the extent to which we have close affectional ties to others, how we admire them, how we identify with them, so that we care about their expectations. Okay, so attachment to other people and how we care about their opinion. Commitment is about an investment in conventional behavior or a stake in conformity that would be jeopardized or lost if engaging in the violation of the law. So it's a stake in conformity, thinking of yourself as a conforming person. Involvement is engrossment in conventional activities, For youth, it could be studying, spending time with family, participating in extracurricular activities. For adults, it could be having a job, having a family, being involved with the community, things like that. And then finally, belief. Belief is the endorsement of general conventional values and norms, especially the belief that laws and society's rules are generally morally correct and should be obeyed. Okay, so it's this like attachment to other people in society, a commitment to conforming to social norms, an involvement in society, and a belief in the norms of society. Okay, so those are kind of they're all kind of interrelated too. Um, the more you believe and the more committed you are, the more involved you are, the more attached you are, they're all kind of intertwined there. Okay. Um, On to my favorite theory. It's called labeling theory by Howard S. Becker. Labeling theory from this comes from Becker's definition. An analysis of the social processes involved in the social attribution of positive or negative characteristics to acts, individuals, or groups. I'll read that again. An analysis of the social processes involved in the social attribution of positive or negative characteristics to acts, individuals, or groups. So this doesn't look at crime. This looks at how somebody is labeled as a criminal. That whole social process, okay? Becker says, quote, social groups create deviance by making the rules whose infraction constitute deviance and by applying those rules to particular people and labeling them as outsiders. From this point of view, deviance is not a quality of the act the person commits, but rather a consequence of the application by others of rules and sanctions to an offender. Okay? So, someone who's deviant is somebody to whom the label has just stuck. Okay? You may have read a book or seen a movie called The Outsiders, and there are two gangs in that book, the Socias and the Greasers. And the Greasers are the ones who are considered deviant. Okay? The Socias are not considered deviant. Their behaviors are basically the same. They drank, they fought, they raced, things like that. Okay? They're like, you know, they did basically the same thing. But the greasers were the ones who were considered deviant because of social class, because they were the poor kids. They're from the wrong side of the tracks. I think Ponyboy Curtis actually said wrong side of the tracks. Okay. This has been shown in some sociological research of the Saints and the Roughnecks as well by a guy named Chambliss. Similar kind of thing, where the Roughnecks are the ones who are considered deviants, that the saints are the ones who are considered, well, the community thinks boys will be boys, or they're sowing wild oats, or something like that. Yet, but the roughnecks were the ones who were considered criminals. You may have seen this before, how there are some people who seem to be able to get away with everything, and there are some people who seem to be able to get away with nothing. So it's not the act. It's the consequence of the labeling. So deviance is not a consequence of the act, but a consequence of the attribution of the label to the person committing the act. Okay. Now, there's primary think about the looking glass self, though. Becker doesn't include this, but I'm kind of like putting this in here. If somebody is told over and over again that they're a deviant, that they're like a criminal or something, if they're treated that way, they'll often internalize that and become that, okay? Because what do they have to lose? Okay, so there's primary deviance where like you get like, say you commit an act of deviance and then you're labeled as a deviant and then that leads to secondary deviance. That's in your textbook there. You should look that up. Okay, so labeling theory. I think that that's really cool. I think that Howard Becker, by the way, is just a genius. I really do. So, um, read some of his other stuff. He's just a genius. Okay, so um, let's move on to drugs. Okay, so in 1970, Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. Okay, and and by the way, if you have not yet done that exercise, do it now before you go any further. Do it now. Okay, so, um, okay, welcome back. 1970, Congress passes the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, or the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. Okay, and they categorized drugs in 5 different ways based upon what they think of their potential for abuse and medical value. Okay, Schedule 1 drugs had high abuse potential, low medical value, lack of accepted safety. Okay, no prescriptions for this stuff. This includes MDMA, or ecstasy, as you might know it as, heroin, LSD, and cannabis. Okay. Schedule 2 drugs are considered to have high abuse potential but some medical value. Okay. Um, these would include some barbiturates, cocaine, amphetamines, morphine, codeine. Highly controlled prescriptions. Okay. Schedule 3 drugs have moderate abuse potential, some medical value. May lead to moderate or low physical dependence or psychological dependence. These are some sedatives. Okay. I think ketamine is there. I think Vicodin recently went to Schedule 2, but it was Schedule 3 for a while. But I think it recently went to Schedule 2. I'd have to look that up. Okay. By the way, you can look up all this stuff too. Schedule 4 had low abuse potential and some medical use. Okay. Um, Similar to this is like Valium and Librium. Okay. And Schedule 5, low potential for abuse and accepted medical value. These are over the counter medicines. Okay, so remember, I had you do an exercise and I had you categorize 8 drugs into 1 of 5 different categories. Okay, and I hope you did this by now. So the first category would be um, not legally available, felony for prescription, or no, felony for possession. Number 2, the second category was available by prescription but felony for possession. 3 was available by prescription, misdemeanor for possession. 4, not legally available, misdemeanor for possession. And 5, over the counter. Now remember, misdemeanors often get you 6 months in jail. Okay, so what were the drugs? Okay, are you ready? Um, Drug number 1. Uh, yeah, this stuff could kill you. This stuff. So some people have this. A lot of people have this as um, category 4. Okay, category 4 or something. Actually, I should get off of this because it's slightly different. Okay, so just like stare at this for a little while and just listen. Okay. Um, Drug number 1 is aspirin. Okay, so maybe you decided to make aspirin a misdemeanor. Okay. Drug number 2 is one of the medically one of the safest drugs, yet it is a Schedule 1 drug. Let's get back over here. Okay, that is LSD. Okay, so what did you do with LSD? Okay? Most people keep drug number three as either not legally available or most people want to keep drug number three a felony, whether it's available by prescription or not. Okay? That is cocaine. Okay? A lot of people want to make drug number four a felony, category one or two, either not legally available or available by prescription. Okay. And those people want to go back to 1919 in the United States. This is alcohol. Okay. Yes, alcohol. Very dangerous drug, by the way. Can be. Okay. Um, there are some people who even want to criminalize the next drug number five. Okay. This one is a drug I did today. It's caffeine, and many of you did it today. Okay. Drug number six, in a certain form, kills more people than all other drugs put together. Okay. Drug number six is nicotine, and it is legal. Okay. Some people want to legalize drug number seven. That's heroin. Okay. And drug number eight, you may have guessed, is cannabis. Even though I told you not to guess the drugs, that one I think is pretty obvious and it's hard not to guess it. Okay, so are any of you surprised? Um, when this is done in a group setting, it really the groups are all over the map. When I put students into groups and put them in the classroom, they're all over the map on what they want to do a lot of the time, especially when it comes to drug number seven, heroin, or number four, alcohol. And so, but drug number three, cocaine, and drug number eight, cannabis, usually people are on the same page. So, um, why does this matter? Well, we incarcerate more people than anyone else in the world. Okay. Um, this is our state and federal incarcerations. This does not include counties. Okay. But on the federal level, let's see, in 2015, we incarcerated 47.5% of those incarcerated were for drugs. Okay. On the state level, 15.2% are incarcerated for drugs. And on the county level, many more people are incarcerated for drugs. Okay. Um, President Obama commuted about 1,300 drug sentences. Okay. So the whole point of the exercise is that drugs are illegal not because of health, but because of who was doing them. And there's a long history of this. Okay, here's a brief history of drug prohibition. Okay, the first laws against drugs were actually in, I want to say 1834, but don't write that down or anything. It was Maine, and it concerned alcohol. Okay, the second drug that was targeted was opium in San Francisco, 1875, and it targeted the Chinese. Um, the Chinese immigrants began arriving in the U.S. around 1848 for the gold rush, and they faced a lot of discrimination. But when jobs were plentiful, they were needed. They had to keep on. They had to, work in the developing industry. So there were jobs available. But after the Panic of '73, economic crisis that we had, that was pretty bad actually. Many people began to blame the Chinese immigrants for, quote, taking their jobs. In fact, there was a political party in California called the Working Man's Party, and their motto was, the Chinese must go. Okay. The Chinese interacted by not interacting with whites. They set up Chinatowns and living apart from white people, banding together for mutual protection. And within these communities, there was opium smoking. There was a fear among whites that opium smoking was going to, among the Chinese, was going to spread to the upper class whites, which would lead to sex between whites and Chinese. So this is a quote from a San Francisco physician named Winslow Anderson that wrote of the sickening sight of young girls lying half undressed on the floor or couches, smoking with their lovers, men and women, Chinese and white people, mix in Chinatown smoking houses. This was rare. Um, Women in Chinatown were rare. Okay, and yeah, women in Chinatown were rare, and white people in Chinatown were rare. Okay, white. Let's see, but yet that didn't matter because of this kind of panic and stuff. So in 1875, San Francisco passed the first anti-opium legislation in the U.S., and it spread to the federal level with the Smoking Opium Exclusion Act in 1909. Okay, cocaine. Um, Doctors isolated cocaine from the coca plant, and it revolutionized surgery, especially eye surgery. Okay, cocaine was even prescribed for cocaine and alcohol, prescribed cocaine to treat alcohol and opiate addiction. This is a common theme that drugs are developed to treat addiction to other drugs. Okay, um, cocaine's downfall was racism. Okay, African Americans in the South used cocaine, but so did whites. Okay, but white people thought that black people use cocaine more. Does this sound familiar? Okay, and there was a big campaign against it. In 1903, the New York Tribune quoted Colonel J.S. Watson of Georgia saying, quote, "Many of the horrible crimes committed in the southern states by the colored people can be traced directly to the cocaine habit." Dr. Christopher Koch asserted in Literary Digest in 1914 that most of the attacks upon white women of the South are a direct result of a cocaine-crazed Negro brain. Okay. Um, Police even increased the caliber of their bullets because they believed that African Americans on cocaine would be unstoppable because black people had thicker skins. And I'm not making this up. This comes from the New York Times in 1914. So this was your classic drug panic that was racist. Okay. All of this led up to cocaine being included in the inclusion of the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914. Okay. Next, marijuana. Okay. Racism against Mexican immigrants. Okay. Um, Marijuana goes back centuries, okay, became popular in the early 1900s or so along the Mexican border among Mexican immigrants, particularly migrant farm workers. From there, it spread to New Orleans among working class African Americans, then into jazz circles, then to bohemians, intellectuals, gamblers, sex workers, and criminals, okay. Um, in the 1920s and 1930s, whites became very critical of what they called the vicious weed. Um, in the years 1914 to 1931, there was a distinctly grassroots opposition to cannabis based on anti Mexican racism. It was seen as a dangerous narcotic that could be spread from the fringes of society to the mainstream, much like opium was thought of. Okay, so there was a guy named Harry Anslinger. He was a former prohibition agent, and after prohibition, he wanted to have a job. So he became head of the newly created Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he launched a major campaign against cannabis. Okay. Um, Wrote something really wild called Marijuana Assassin of Youth. Um, there was a big propaganda campaign which included that. This propaganda campaign included uh, a movie called Reefer Madness. You might want to look that up. Um, and posters like this one. I'm going to go ahead a little bit to this one. Okay. It's one of my favorite posters. Daring drug expose, shame, harm, despair, marijuana, weed with roots in hell. And here is a man who is helping a woman to shoot marijuana. Okay. That is not how it's done. Okay. That's not how it's done. Not recommended for children. Okay. Um, What lust, crime, sorrow, hate, shame, despair, misery, weird orgies, wild parties, and unleashed passions. Okay, really terrible, horrible, scary things. Okay, big propaganda campaign. Okay, but it was like the origins of that was anti-Mexican racism. Okay, along the southern border. Okay, let's get to the Nixon administration. Okay, um, targeting the African Americans in the anti-war left. Okay, a guy named John Ehrlichman did an interview in 2016, and Nixon, by the way, I think coined the term war on drugs. He said, quote, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we are lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Okay, so in this case, there's an admission by this guy who was the head of Nixon's domestic policy. He was heavily implicated also in the Watergate scandal, one of the big four. And so anyway, he's basically admitting that they're using, drugs to go after political enemies here. Okay. We also have the 500-to-1 ratio of powder cocaine versus crack. Okay. Um, the same, okay, 500 grams of powder cocaine would get you the same 5-year prison sentence as 5 years of crack cocaine. Okay. Well, this is that was called the 500-to-1 law. Okay. It was later reduced to 500 grams of cocaine would get you the same prison sentence as 28 grams of crack. Okay. But there's still a discrepancy. Okay. Why? Well, powder cocaine was associated with white people. In the 1970s, the mainstream media once referred to it as the champagne of drugs. Okay. Of course, and it was expensive. Well, in the 1980s, poorer urban communities, often African American, wanted some of that too, so they came up with crack. Okay, and crack was heavily vilified in the mainstream media, and so there was a big drug panic there, and there was if you look at some of the propaganda from back then, it was heavily stigmatizing African Americans. Okay, I compare we compare how the treatment of people who did crack back then with people who were addicted to opioids today, and who's treated with more compassion. Well, often it's like people who are addicted to opioids. Okay, in this crisis now. Okay, so but people who did crack were especially vilified. Okay, and hence that sentencing discrepancy, and which targeted African Americans. And this is where we go into, again, I'm restating here, drugs became illegal not because of the harm they could do, but because of who was doing them. Okay, a lot of harmful drugs are legal, and drugs not very harmful are illegal. Something else is going on. So, what's going on? I want to talk to you a little bit about Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Okay, and that is your TED Talk for today also. So, but I mean, she'll talk about it. If you already watch it, I'm, emphasizing certain points about it. So, okay, we when it comes to drug use, drug dealing, drug buying, selling, everything about drugs, most studies say that across racial groups, people use drugs and deal drugs similarly across racial groups. In fact, when differences are shown, as Michelle Alexander points out, that it is whites who are more likely to deal, especially youth, white, more likely to deal drugs. But generally, it's people across, it's basically the same across racial groups. Yet, incarceration rates are disproportionate. Okay. Um, According to the Drug Policy Alliance, Black people comprise 13% of the U.S. population, um, but Black people comprise 31% of those arrested for drug law violations and nearly 40% of those incarcerated in state or federal prisons for drug law violations. Latinos make up 17% of the U.S. population, but comprise 20% of the people in state prisons for drug offenses and 37% of people incarcerated in federal prisons for drug offenses. Okay, so yeah, white Americans are about 72% of the population, but they do not represent 72% of those incarcerated for drugs. Okay, so Michelle Alexander's point here is that the war on drugs was fought in a discriminatory way that targeted African American communities, and police had wide discretion on which communities and individuals to target. As a result, many African Americans are living under a new Jim Crow, similar to what their grandparents experienced under the old Jim Crow. So, things like voting rights being denied, things like discrimination in housing, things like discrimination in hiring, those kinds of things. That was legal under the old Jim Crow, that kind of discrimination against African Americans. It gets struck down. Those, racial segregation in the South, that gets struck down. But then what's happening is that under the guise of the war on drugs, many African Americans become drug offenders, therefore felons. And then once they are felons, they get denied their voting rights. They are discriminated against in housing. They are discriminated against in hiring, and they lead similar lives to what their grandparents experienced under the old Jim Crow. Okay, here's how it works. First, the U.S. Supreme Court eviscerates the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, this is mostly done through something called consent searches and pretext stops. A consent search is where the police officer gets your consent to search your car. Okay, now there's a lot of pressure put on people about searching your car and stuff. A police officer can be very intimidating when it comes to getting consent. Okay, if you consent for a police officer to search your car, it's a legal search. If you don't give them your consent, it might be a legal search, might not. Okay, but it is, yeah. So, but if you consent, it's legal. And the pretext stops. That's pulling someone over for any old violation. Okay, busted taillight or things like that. Driving too fast, driving too slow, driving the speed limit. Okay, there really is nothing else. Okay, there's so that's where you pull someone over for a pretext. This was backed by the Drug Enforcement Agency. They trained police departments to how to do consent searches and pretext stops through a program called Operation Pipeline. Federal dollars and military equipment are channeled to local police departments to fight the war on drugs. Okay, so the police departments get some money out of this. So drug forfeiture laws also become highly lucrative. Property or cash can be seized based on the suspicion of illegal drug activity. Okay, those auctions, the police auctions and things like that. Some of that stuff is seized from drug raids and stuff. I think it should be unconstitutional, because it's taken without due process, because you don't even have to be convicted in order for like, your property or cash to be forfeited. Okay, you don't have to be convicted. Okay. Uh, Police enforcement activities are shaped by the political rhetoric and media frenzy that defines the drug problems are based within African American communities, especially concerning crack cocaine. Okay, now we know that in the richest communities, people do drugs. There are drugs going on there. Okay. Yet the police departments tend to leave them alone, and they have gone, like, looking for drugs more in the hood. And I'll get there. Police officers act on conscious or and unconscious biases. Okay. So when police go looking for drugs, they go looking in the hood. They go targeting African Americans in poor urban areas. Okay. This is made possible by the construction of poor urban areas or black ghettos that we'll get to when we talk about race. Okay. Um, Courts reject claims of racial bias unless it can be proven that the cop is racist. That is very hard to do. Even though we know that there's a systemic discrimination going on, the courts reject that as a claim. As so if someone says, hey, because of systemic racism, I was unfairly targeted, the courts reject that. You have to show that the cop was racist, okay, which is hard to do. So then, once a person is convicted of a crime, they are now a felon. And the unfavorable treatment they received is justified by that label. However, since racial minorities are disproportionately targeted, arrested, and convicted, it creates the new Jim Crow, in which racial oppression is cloaked in colorblindedness. So all of the consequences of being a felon, taking away voting rights, discrimination in hiring, etc., are disproportionately experienced by African Americans in particular. Okay, so this is a time for me to confess a little few things. I have done a lot of drugs in my life, okay? And yet I am John Fox, PhD. And I'm pretty convinced that I got to where I am because I'm white, because me and my community were not targeted, okay? My African American counterpart, who is targeted, may have been arrested, charged, convicted, and become a felon, and not have had the opportunities to pursue a PhD when they didn't do anything different than what I did. And that is white privilege. Okay, so that's something for you to think about. Enjoy Michelle Alexander's TED Talk, and I look forward to your comments. Include, like, anything you want to say here in those comments too. So I know this was a long one, so I'm not going to have you do much else. Okay. Okay. Next time we're going to talk about stratification and poverty. So have a good day.